Well, welcome to another installment of 42nd Street Pete's Grindhouse. And today we're going to take you back to the mid-60s for a little TV show that showed some really cheesy horror movies. And that TV show was Chiller Theater. Excuse the shitty graphic poster here, but that's all I could find that said Chiller on it. Now, Chiller Theater started, I believe, in the mid-60s, and it basically showcased a bunch of movies that it seemed that no other station wanted. Well, let me elaborate on that. Around the same time, the AIP library, some of the Universal Big Monster library, and the Columbia Sam Katzman library wound up on WPIX Channel 7 for their big show thing at 4 o'clock every afternoon during the week. The Allied Artists package, which consisted of maybe the giant behemoth, Attack of the Crab Monsters, Not of This Earth, War of the Satellites, things like that, wound up on Channel 9 WOR in New York. Now, Chiller Theater ran on WPIX Channel 11. And it seems like they wound up with a bunch of films that were like really weird and odd and twisted, but for whatever reason were sort of a little bit more fucked up than the ones that were shown other places. Like these films had visible blood, open brain surgery, a torture chamber here and there, and some violence. But be that as it may, that's the way this thing was showcased, and it ran 8 o'clock at night every Saturday night. And of course, being I was going to Catholic school, the Legion of Decency hooked onto this whole thing and sent notes home with us about how we shouldn't watch this. Well, I begged my parents to watch this, and I became a good kid and all this other shit, so I eventually got to watch this stuff. And the way it played out was, it opened up with a montage of clips from the movies they had, like The Ape Man, Plan 9, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Killers from Space, The Cyclops, things like that, and with a Chiller shaky logo put over them. Down the road, the logo changed to this six-fingered hand that came up out of the grave and yanked down the Chiller letters. Further along the line, Chiller Theater would be hosted by the legendary John Zachary for I don't know how long it lasted, but I remember it didn't last that long. But I have been sitting here dredging my mind and trying to come up with the films that originally ran in that time slot, because they ran continuously. Right about now, I came up with roughly 30 films. Of course, I'm going to have to do this in 2 parts because I can't cover 30 films, because we'll be sitting here for an hour and you'll get fucking bored and tune out. So I started the list the other day, and first on the list is from 1956, The Black Sleep. This was an all-star extravaganza with Basil Rathbone, Akim Tarimov, Lon Chaney Jr., Bela Lugosi, John Carradine, and Tor Johnson. It was also released as Dr. Caedmon's Secret. Well, Dr. Caedmon is played by Basil Rathbone, who is trying to cure his wife of a brain tumor. So he goes to this gypsy Odo, who is played by Kim Tarimov, who drugs people with this drug called the Black Sleep because it simulates death. And the bodies are sent down to Dr. Caedmon's basement laboratory, where he messes with the brains. Well, like any good doctor, he keeps his rejects in a dungeon down in the basement. The rejects are a blind Tor Johnson, a very shaky John Carradine who thinks he's fighting the Crusades, some woman who has patches of hair all over herself, and some sailor who they actually showed the brain surgery going on. They actually showed the knife going into the brain, and now he's disfigured and everything. Eventually they escape and wreak havoc, and eventually the Mad Doctor is killed and justice prevails or whatever. Backstory on this film was that basically Lugosi was a little tweaked because he didn't have any dialogue, and he petitioned the director who he had worked with before, Reginald LeBorg, to give him dialogue. Well, he gave him dialogue but cut it out anyway. Cheney really didn't have any dialogue, as he's this, brutish mute Mongol, I think, or something. But it looks like Cheney really didn't give a shit whether he had any dialogue or not. The Gypsy Udo was originally offered to Peter Lorre, but he wanted more money, so they wound up with Akim Cherimoff. This was Cheney's second picture for Bel Air Productions. His first was The Big House USA, where he co-starred with his buddy Broderick Crawford and a very young Charles Bronson. Next up, from 1958, is the perennial favorite Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. And I'm sure before this was sold to TV that this infested the drive-in screens and stopped traffic with Allison Hayes' huge 50-foot woman type bust. Story behind this one is there's a spaceship floating around with this giant being in it, and it is for some reason in search of these gems which Allison Hayes' character wears around her neck. Well, this giant tracks her down and takes the gem, and I guess being in contact with the giant makes her grow up to be 50 feet tall. And her husband, Harry, is cheating with slutty Yvette Vickers, and of course they have the woman restrained for a while, but then she gets pissed off and decides to go looking for Harry. Of course, she destroys half the town in the process, wrecks the bar, crushes Yvette under the roof of the bar, and picks up Harry and strolls off toward the high tension lines where she is fried like a Frito. Hayes appeared in a lot of 50s horror movies like The Crawling Hand and The Hypnotic Eye, but sadly she died at age 46 from blood poisoning. Next up is one that's on everybody's worst film list, Killers from Space from 1954, starring Peter Graves, who was the brother of James Arness. James Arness also did a 50s sci-fi film called The Thing, which he starred. Later on, both of these guys would go on to battle big bugs, James Arness in The Thing, and Peter Graves in The Beginning of the End. Well, in this one, Graves is an astronaut that is captured by aliens and sent back down with some kind of shit going on. Basically, these aliens are wearing jumpsuits with what looks like ping pong balls for eyes, and are going to conquer the world with stock footage of lizards, spiders, and other shit. Really bad movie, like I said, on everybody's probably top 100 bad films list. Next up is 1958's She-Demons, one directed by Dick Kahuna. And this one stars Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, Irish McCalla, as a rich girl who is shipwrecked with 3 other men, one who is Victor Sen Young, on this island, volcanic island somewhere in the tropics. This island is also home to a bunch of Nazi rejects, one who was a mad scientist who was trying to restore his wife's burnt face. And they experiment on the local native population, which is a bunch of beauty queens that they turn into crusty she-demons. Look for veteran character actors in a lot of these horror movies. Gene Roth is one of the big mean Nazis, Igor. Of course, the volcano erupts, people are killed, and the good guys sail off into the sunset. Next up is 1957's Plan 9 from Outer Space, which was arguably billed as the worst film ever made. Well, there's not much I can add to what's already been said about Plan 9 from Outer Space except this. Compared to some of the shit that's been shot in the last 40 years, this thing could be on an A-list right about now. From 1958, also another film by Dick Kuna, is Frankenstein's Daughter, where this one stars Beach Party idol John Ashley and Sandra Knight, Jack Nicholson's ex-wife, who was also in Blood of Dracula. A Dr. Frank, who is a direct descendant of Dr. Frankenstein, is doing some serum experiments in this doctor who hired him's house as a research assistant. He shoots up the doctor's daughter with this crap, and she becomes this nasty-looking creature that stalks the night. But she is not Frankenstein's daughter. Frankenstein's daughter is assembled from some gory body parts picked up by Dr. Frank's assistant. So they build this creature, which they call Frankenstein's daughter, who was actually played by Harry Wilson, who was a caveman in the original 1 million BC. The creature crushes a guy between 2 doors, and you see blood spurt out of his throat. The mad doctor at the end gets a face full of acid, who the Frankenstein creature touches and then turns into fire and burns up. This is a really twisted little sadistic, sick movie with some sexual overtones thrown in, but hey, we're kids, we're not supposed to know this shit. From 1956, now, why this film doesn't get a lot of respect is beyond me. It's The Beast from Hollow Mountain. Originally, this story was conceived by King Kong's Willis O'Brien, something to do with dinosaurs versus cowboys. Well, what happens is there's a place called Hollow Mountain surrounded by this mysterious swamp, and the area is cursed. Well, there's a drought going on, and there's two ranchers, one played by Wild Bill Hickok TV series star Guy Madison, who's the American down there who isn't too liked, and this rival ranch. Well, cattle are disappearing for some reason. And the actual reason the cattle are disappearing is because this dinosaur is eating them, because the swamp is home to a holdover T-Rex, who is very hungry. And the stop motion animation in this is fantastic. This dinosaur runs, has a tongue that rivals Gene Simmons. As a matter of fact, he might be a direct descendant of, Gene Simmons might be a direct descendant of this dinosaur for all we know. But anyway, Guy Madison fights this dinosaur, he shoots it, and obviously bullets have no effect except this thing bleeds a lot over one eye. Eventually, they trick this thing into walking into quicksand, and that's the end from The Beast from Hollow Mountain. But like I said, the animation in this thing's superb. It's on a par with what Ray Harryhausen has done. Guy Madison eventually ran out of work in the States and wound up over in Europe doing spaghetti westerns like Payment in Blood and Return of Django. Another one from 1958 is the British film The Quatermass Experiment, which was released here as The Creeping Unknown. Now, this was the first 3 astronauts go up, and what the fuck comes back down. 3 astronauts are sent up, but only 1 returns, and the cameras in the spaceship reveal that some kind of strange space dust got in there and morphed all these men into one. Now, the 1 astronaut returns, confused, harried-looking guy who is broken out of the hospital by his wife. But before he gets out of the hospital, for some reason, he punches a cactus plant and absorbs the plant in his hand. The guy that breaks him out of the hospital is in an elevator with him when this astronaut turns around and kills him. That scene got cut out for U.S. release for some reason. It got put in back with the Kino Lorber Blu-ray, where basically whatever happened, this thing basically sucked his face off with the hand. Now it wanders into a zoo and pretty much absorbs all the animals there and winds up at Westminster Abbey as a tentacled blob with bulging eyes that is basically going to absorb the world if we don't electrocute the bastard on the scaffold, which scientist Professor Quatermass, played by Bronnon Don Levy, does. Don Levy returned in the sequel, Quatermass 2, released here as Enemy from Space. A really weird, creepy movie which pretty much was used to create The Incredible Melting Man, which was another, astronaut goes up and whatever the hell comes down. The next film is a real clunker, 1958's Giant from the Unknown, which is actually the first film I was allowed to see. There was a cattle mutilation and a killing before the actual giant is unearthed by a lightning strike, who is basically the Spanish conquistador Diablo or something like that, played by Buddy Bear, brother of fighter Max Bear. There's some killings and some boulders thrown around until the monster is eventually killed. Well, looking back, the film kind of sucked then, and at repeat viewing about a year or 2 ago, made me think it still sucks as of today. It's kind of boring, and I don't know why people like it, but it really didn't do anything for me. Also from 1956, we have The Indestructible Man, starring Lon Chaney Jr. as Butcher Benton, who pulled an armed car robbery and hid the money, but is turned in by his lawyer and his 2 accomplices. He's set to be executed on death row, but the lawyer, Paul Lowe, and his 2 gang members, Joe Marcello and Squeamy Ellis, really cool name, really want to know where the money is, but he's not going to tell them, but he does tell them he'll be back to finish them off. Well, he's electrocuted, but this mad scientist, I think it's Dr. Bradshaw, buys the body and brings it back to his lab, where he zaps this thing with his assistant Joe Flynn, who you'll remember as Captain Binghamton from the McHale's Navy show. The butcher comes back to life, but when they try to draw blood from him, the needle bends. The butcher kills both of them, finds a car that's broken down, helps them change the tire, kills the driver, and drives in to find Paul Lowe and the rest of them. Well, the butcher tracks down his gang members, and Paul Lowe is put in protective custody. The money was hidden in the sewer, and the police follow the butcher into the sewer and shoot him, but the bullets have no effect, so they hit him with a flamethrower. Badly burned, he climbs out up until these two big electric grids which collide and basically turn the butcher into a pile of ashes. Chaney has no dialogue, and I think the excuse was given that the electricity burned his vocal cords, but he does threaten Paul Lowe in the beginning before he's electrocuted. The backstory was that Chaney told director Jack Palahniuk that he didn't want any additional dialogue because he would start drinking heavily after lunch. Next up, from 1953, is this boring British sci-fi film, The Four-Sided Triangle. Now, you got to understand my mentality back then. I'm a kid. I want to see monsters. I don't want to see this talky thing where basically it's two guys in love with the same woman, and they come up with this thing that basically can duplicate anything, so why not duplicate the woman so they both can enjoy her? Really bad idea. But again, didn't like it, really have nothing good to say about it. Probably on a new view I might enjoy it more, being that I'm more cerebral now, but I haven't seen it floating around. And the last movie for this episode will be The Ape Man from 1943, starring Bela Lugosi, who looks like a stooped-over Amish farmer. He's obviously been doing something with monkey glands, and he needs spinal fluid to survive, but since nobody else will give it to him, him and his pet ape wander around at night killing people for their spinal fluid. Monogram released this and felt that it was successful enough to warrant a sequel, so they made Return of the Ape Man, which has not a fucking thing to do with this movie, but starred Lugosi and also starred George Zucco and John Carradine. But George Zucco was replaced by somebody, but they still kept him in the credits. So this is part one of Chiller Theater. And before I go, I have to address something that happened over the 4th of July weekend that I know people don't want me to get political, but this is something that is very, very wrong. Right around here in Akron, Ohio, an unarmed black guy was shot 60 times. 90 shots were fired at him. Yes, he did have a gun in his truck. He was running. He did not have a gun when he was shot. He was hit 60 times. Now we segue to a parade on 4th of July in Illinois, where a white trash piece of shit got on a roof and basically killed 7 people, including 2 parents of a toddler, who will now grow up an orphan. For whatever reason, this guy was taken alive. Now, if you look at the fucking bullshit going on, it seems like every one of these white psychopaths is taken alive, but for whatever reason, the police seem to be dead set on killing black people. Now, like I said, I don't like to get political, but this shit has gone way too fucking far. The cops are out of fucking control, and this fucking firearm shit is out of control. There is no fucking need for anybody in this world, in this country, to own an automatic weapon. The signs were there with all these people, yet they do it, and like the governor of Illinois said on the news yesterday, mass shootings in America are a weekly occurrence. This is really fucked up. But again, what can I do about it except elaborate on and on here that I am not happy with this situation. I do not know where this is going, and this deeply affects everyone listening to me and living in this country. So, don't want to leave on a down note, but I had to say something about this. So, we will be back shortly with part 2 and maybe part 3 of the movies that made Chiller Theater what it is. So until then, please stay safe. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for telling your friends about us, and we'll catch you on the flip side.